coming into our second installation of helping just resource you all there on the front lines during these extraordinary times. We know that you all are carrying a lot, and there's a lot that's so fluid and things that we don't know about. As we have gone online, and just before we got on this call, as we heard, at least for those of us here in Washington, Governor Inslee saying that the stay at home is going to be extended till May 4th here in Washington. So I suspect that Governor Brown will probably follow suit down in Oregon, but we'll see how that goes. We are praying for you. We know that you're practicing a lot of adaptive leadership right now, and I've been talking to a lot of your pastors and staff, and they're both excited to serve you all, but I know they're quite tired as well, as I'm sure many of you are as lay leaders. We've been resourcing, trying to provide resources over the last couple weeks. Last week on Tuesday was around technology as people were still getting online. On Thursday around Holy Week and Easter planning. And this past Tuesday and tonight, we are addressing financial leadership during times of crisis, but more particularly in this first half of our time, we'll be talking about the CARES Act, and particularly the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. Who we have here with us to help us through that is Vice President of Real Estate Services with National Covenant Properties, no stranger to us here in the Pacific Northwest Conference, a dear friend and colleague, Rollie Peterson. And he'll walk us through a deck of slides that he has, both about the CARES Act, the PPP, but also about considerations that we all should be making as far as financial leadership in our churches. We also have with us the conference treasurer and current chair of First Covenant Church Seattle, Brian Whitaker. And he has just been a cornerstone to helping us with our finances in the conference, and has been incredibly valuable as we think through our finances as well as our camp and many others. So Brian will chime in as well as we talk in that second half. I just want to remind you, if you could just keep yourselves on mute while the presentation is going, and feel free to type out questions via the chat. And Dawn and I will be, we're here from the staff here on the call, and we'll be looking through those, and Rollie and Brian can see the chat as well. So feel free to communicate your questions that way, okay? So Dawn, am I missing anything?
No, that's great. I just want to encourage some of you, I see your names, but if you could rename yourself and add the church that you're from, that would be really great to see kind of who's represented here.
Yeah, so roll your mouse over your name. Right. Or it might be the 3 dots to the top right too. It's not uniform for some reason.
Oh, okay. So you'll find a rename option and you can do it there.
Yeah. Okay. With that, we'll hand it over to Rollie. Rollie, thanks for being with us twice in 1 week. Tuesday, we had just about 70 people with us. And how many do we have tonight? We have about 27 so far. So I know some are repeats, but it's just great that so many of you have called in. Rollie, thank you.
And we recorded the other one, but we understand we're recording this one as well, because there will even be updates today that we didn't have a couple days ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, I love being with the churches. I see a lot. It's nice to see these faces because I recognize a lot of you. So thank you for joining in. I did this presentation for the first time on Saturday to your counterparts down in the Pacific Southwest Conference. And then by the time I did it earlier this week, was that Tuesday, I believe, a lot of things had changed from Saturday to Tuesday. And lucky you, a lot of things have changed from Tuesday to Wednesday. So you're getting the latest. And I don't think it's the last changes. I think when you start applying tomorrow, you might get some more changes, but all I can do is give you the best of what I got and give you resources on where to follow up on information. So I'm sure if you've tried to be following this CARES Act and the Payment Protection Program, you've got overwhelmed by all the changes. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through my slides to kind of get me talking through this. So let's just hit the next one. Yeah, just hit them all. Okay. So this part of the information hasn't changed from when it came out. It's still available to 501c3 organizations of 500 employees or less, including churches and camps. And I'm going to talk to you about how and should you apply for these funds. And it is a low interest obtained by your local bank or credit union who get their funds from the Small Business Administration. So let's hit the next slide and go all the way through that one. So here's a part that has changed from when I first presented it. When I first presented on Saturday, we thought it was going to be an interest rate of less than 4%. And that was still the case on Tuesday. On Wednesday, believe it or not, it was saying that it was 0.5%, but today it came back that it's 1%. So I think the one thing that you can hold true is it's going to be less than 4%. So you know, when it comes tomorrow, but as of now, it's supposed to be a 1% loan. When it came out, it said it was 10 years, but now it's down to a 2-year term. And that's a 2-year term based on whatever is not going to be forgivable. And I'll talk about that later. When it first came out, you had 12 months in order to make the first payment, but now it's down to a 6-month period to make the first payment. So it roughly covers a 30-month period. The loan could be up to 100% forgivable. It has a factor in there where you are calculating the number of FTEs that you had on February 15th to June 30th in 2019. And you're going to compare it with what FTEs you have February 15th, June 30th of 2020. The whole premise behind this program is that you retain your employees through this crisis. So if you have the same amount of FTEs that you had in 2019 or more, you have a chance for it to be 100% forgivable. There is a caveat though that I will talk about in a little bit on that one. So if we can just go to the next slide and go to this summary. So I'm going to stay on this for quite a bit to help get you through this. The money right now, if once you apply and get approved, it should be in your bank account in probably 1 or 2 weeks at the most. So that's a pretty quick turnaround. The calculation that has remained consistent throughout this process is you need to have your payroll registry, and I'm going to say payroll registry because this is a term that's been used as it gets starting to get rolled out to the bank. So really what you're transmitting, you know, to the government, you know, at the end of each year and every quarter, if you have that payroll registry, so we can see what your payroll is for that last 12 months, and they're going to take the average of that, the average monthly payroll cost, and multiply that by 2.5%. So that's a number that's been pretty consistent. So before you apply, just make sure you can gather that information and put that together. So if you have it together before you apply, then you can plug in the numbers much easier. I'm going to talk a little bit now. Some of this stuff I'm going to share with you is not in the slides. but I'm going to help clarify some things. I didn't have this in any of my slides because it was a constantly changing place. And I'm going to give you there's a website that has all this information constantly updated. And so I want you to write this down. It's fairly easy to remember, but you write down church, COVID-19. I know that's a strange word you haven't heard too much. So just say church, COVID-19.com. Now, if you go to that site, it's orchestrated by Vanderbulen, and they have been what I would consider my best source for information outside of the U.S. Treasury. And they did their best on Saturday when I presented to interpret this CARES Act. Then they revised it as certain determinations came out, and they keep revising it even as I speak today. Now, there's a couple of things that are big that have changed recently, and I'm going to go through those with you. When you're looking at payroll cost on this program, it's considered salary, wages, payments, and cash tip, vacation, parental leave, family leave, medical leave, sick leave, health benefits, retirement benefits, so those pension payments, state and local taxes. It does not include federal taxes, so those are deducted from whatever your payroll costs are. And then a determination that changed during the week are these. Contractors, so anybody you pay 1099 are not included in payroll costs. Why that is, I don't know, but that is a determination. And the other thing that just came out today, and this came from Vanderbulen, is that housing allowances are not included. Now, I haven't been able to find the justification for that. So what I would do when you're preparing your payroll costs and outlining it before you apply, have housing costs in a separate column. So you can easily add or subtract it in there whether or not it's included, but separate it out. Any questions on that? Okay.
Rollie, I was watching the church tax and law webinar this morning, and Richard Hammer was raising the same concern, but said that his Harvard Law School reading of this was still unclear. Did Vanderbloemen, did they reference anything specific about that?
I can't find anything that Vanderbloemen referenced, but they have it crossed out this afternoon. So okay. Until I get an answer,
with both.
Until, just prepare it with both.
That's good advice.
So I see the question about our utility allowances included. What I would do is having a separate column, any car allowances or any allowances that you get on the side, just have that in a separate column next to your housing allowance. Just keep those separate, and because ultimately the bank that you send the application to is going to take your data and tell you how much you can borrow. And then the forgiveness aspect of it, it has one more component that was provided by the U.S. Treasury, and it said that 75% of the amount you receive needs to be used for payroll costs. Okay, so if you don't use 75% of it for payroll costs, then there's a portion that will not be forgivable. So keep that in mind. So if you get an amount and and you have to spend this before June 30th of 2020. Does that make sense? So if you know how much you're going to spend in payroll costs over until June 30th of 2020, and you know right off the bat that you're not going to be able to spend 75% of that money, then you might want to just say, please reduce the amount to X, if that makes sense. If you want to make sure it's 100% forgivable. Because that seems to be a hard and fast number. And then they're looking at the FTE comparison between the two.
So Rollie, two questions. One is,
Yes.
when we go back to calculate our average payroll cost for the last 12 months, does that start with Q2 19 since we've just completed Q1 20?
Well, I think you want to have your average, your payroll cost from January of 2019 and just go all the way through March 31 if you can do it all the way through there. I mean,
Okay.
you know, I've seen some numbers just going through February, but if you're just going to provide more data going through March 31. But what they've said specifically, if you you need to be a church or a nonprofit that's in existence before February 15th, and if you were just in existence, say January of 2020, you can just do the average of January and February to give you an average payroll cost. So I would say just have it all and let the bank do the determination, you know, when you apply, and put that together.
So that's an excellent piece of advice. So don't just do 19, but also include in there Q1 20. Good. And then Rollie, any clarity on the interest? I know the amount is ever changing, but have we heard anything about the interest starting once the money is received? And if we spend 100% and 100% is forgiven, do we just pay the interest or no interest? Have you heard any clarity on that today or yesterday?
I haven't seen any written idea on that. So my, you know, I would say calculate the worst case scenario for yourself, and just figure if you get it 100% forgiven, what would be the potential interest over that period, and just say, I'm going to plan to spend that amount to get this loan. There are so many things like that that are unclear, but I think once you apply and ask your lender, you can ask your lender that direct question and get a direct answer, because they're getting information, you know, at the same time we all are, and trying to decipher it. And just a reminder of what you can use the money for. Once you make sure you can spend 75% on payroll costs, then you can spend it on mortgage interest payments, rent payments, utility, and interest on other debt obligations that were incurred prior to February 15th. If you spend it on any other things other than that, those portions could be not forgiven. So it's important for you to document what you're spending on. And they reference an 8-week period for some reason, an 8-week period from the time you get the money. So just make sure you're looking at this 8-week period and what you can possibly spend. Some of you, hopefully you've already lined up or talked with your bank and found out whether or not they can do it or not. I received several inquiries. We're not going to be able to do this. And then contacting some of the big banks that they don't have a relationship with, they've said they're going to take care of their people first. What I have obtained is, and I've got it in the summary here, the Evangelical Christian Credit Union, which is based in Southern California, they are willing to act on your behalf. They will waive their opening fees to join the credit union and process your request. I was introduced to these people about 10 years ago when I was competing with them for a loan for one of my churches down in Southern California. And they've been gracious to me ever since they lost out on that deal. But I've given you this link. I just talked to him this afternoon just to confirm. And he said, we may not get our applications in on Friday, but we want to gather a list and we'll at least get them going on Monday, which I think is still in plenty of time to get this. I mean, you've got to really get your application in probably by the end of next week to really have a chance at getting some of this money. The sooner you can get it in, the better.
Rollie, do you see some of the questions there?
I don't see any questions right now, so let me know where should I grab
okay.
them? Let me just wait. If I click there, I can see them. Okay.
Okay.
So probably the next one would
I see
be
that.
Janine in Creekside.
Yeah, I do have an answer for that one. What they state is that if you get everybody that's gone on voluntary furloughs or so on, if you get them back fully operational by June 30th, you can count them as the full FTEs and it won't be a penalty for you. But you can also, if you're then paying them those back wages or whatever, you can take that out of that money that you're paying, because that's what you've been paying in that last 3-week period or 8-week period. So the goal of this program is to get everybody back and fully employed. So it fits within that program. And the question is, health insurance and pension included along with that? And the answer is yes. The dates, it's February 15th through June 30th. So not February 28th. February 15th.
That's for calculating the FTEs, right?
Yeah,
just to be
for
clear.
calculating the FTEs. And that's the period that, whenever they refer to a period of time, they're referring to that period of time.
Sorry, I just lost my.
So
that's this right here that we're talking about, that bottom part.
Yep.
Mhm.
So if you can see that, and I get questions about that say, well, I've seen FTEs being 30 hours versus 40. All of their data shows that they're referring to 40 hours, but if you look at it, we're just trying to be consistent. So if you look at whatever period you have and do a calculation and do that same calculation for the period in 2020, you should be able to know whether there's a difference. And so you just have to give the bank the data and show them and let them do the calculation. But
so really helpful way to think about it is whoever is hired as a full-time employee, despite how many hours they work, if they're a full-time employee, then that's 1 FTE. And for those who are not hired as full-time, Rollie has suggested counting their hours up and dividing it by 40, and that gives you that number of FTEs.
So adding those two numbers together will give you your calculation. But you just don't get into a debate of whether it's 30 or 40 hours, because in the end, they're just trying to compare the two periods in time and to see how they are. I mean, if you compare one and do a calculation of 30 hours and another one do a calculation of 40 hours, then you're going to have a problem. Just do it the same for each period. And
Rollie, there's a question.
It'll become much more clear when you apply tomorrow, hopefully, or how soon you do it. Make sure. I mean, you don't want to go rushing down to the bank. There should be an app that you should be able to use, and you should be able to download your information to them via a secure portal. Make sure that you are the ones making contacts with the bank, so you know who you're dealing with.
Rollie, can you comment about how big this program is and what the likelihood you'll receive a loan if you apply? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. The money available is $349 billion. And there's been some calculations. If everybody who is a nonprofit and a church eligible for this program were to apply, the their need would probably be about $950 billion. So there's roughly a third of the money available for the potential need that's out there. So if you just look at those two numbers, that's why it's important for you to get out there and get it if you need it. And I'm gonna add that if you need it number. If you as a church have plenty of reserves and you can weather a storm like this, maybe you don't want to rush out and do this kind of a thing. Just you want to make sure that the churches in need get it. And I've had that discussion with a number of churches that are just wondering, should I apply or should I not apply? And you need to make that decision ahead of time.
Yeah, we've heard, some word that working with your current bank is going to be the best setup, that there's been some rumors that banks are going to work with their clients first who have applied. Not completely substantiated, but that's kind of the word on the street. So as Rollie suggested on that, the end of this slide here, if your bank is not a commercial bank or you're needing to find a backup, this Evangelical Christian Credit Union is a good place to start. Go ahead and go to that webpage right now and you'll see that they've got a welcome for churches to apply, and they will waive that initiation fee that is there.
So I just don't want you to feel lost tomorrow when you're going to apply and feel like you're getting the runaround. If you're getting enough runaround out there, you can go to this site.
Rollie, there's questions from Neil about what if an FTE departs after July 15th? Can you see that there from Neil and Bethany?
Well, they're just looking at that period of June 30th when they're comparing FTEs. So if somebody's leaving in July, that's not going to affect it, as far as I know.
There's no reporting there. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see the other ones?
Let me pull them up to make sure I'm getting, because I just want to spend as much time on this as we can because it is crazy. Well, yeah.
Neil's got a second part. Do you see that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could the funding revert to a grant from a grant to a loan if an FTE departs after June? Well, what I would
Same answer.
It's the same question. What I would do is never refer to it as a grant. It is a loan obligation that you are taking that is a chance to be forgivable. And there are steps that you're going to need to follow. But the period in time that they're going to look for those FTEs, again, is that February 15th to June 30th. That's been consistent in all the things. Then the question, can you expand on should I apply or not apply? Comment.
Rollie, could you maybe answer Jeff's first and then go back to Sila's?
Yeah.
Is that Scott there? Yeah.
You have guidance on plenty of reserve, i.e. 3 months versus 6 months. I would have answered this a ton different before this crisis. And plenty of reserve. Gosh, you're always better with 6 months, but you're going to know your congregation, and you're going to know, right, probably today you're going to have a good idea on how your congregation is responding during this crisis. So you should have an idea of what your shortage is. So if you have 6 months of 100% of your expenses, or if you have 3 months of your 100% of your expenses, that is set aside as an operational reserve, and I'll talk about that later in the thing. So if you have that much in an operational reserve, then you probably got some additional money that's sitting in, a capital reserve or other types of reserves. I would say 3 months of operational reserve is plenty. But if you look and you have 3 months of money in the bank, but part of it's earmarked for many different things, then I would say you don't have enough. So I probably haven't answered that question because it comes down to an individual when you look at it and how your church is going to respond. I used to, and I'll tell you how I used to answer this question. I would have said 3 months of half of your expenses should be fine if you can do that. But that, I don't think that's nearly enough. I think you got to have 100% of your expenses for at least 3 months in a reserve to get by. And that would be my statement on that one. So it does come down to an individual church decision. If your church isn't responding well to this crisis, and you've got a lot of people that are unemployed, and the incomes have dropped, and everything has dropped, you might feel like you need to have a little bit more. I mean, this crisis does tax how you're going to do your reserves and take care of it. But
can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Can I just add to that answer as far as the should we or should we not apply? You know, some folks will say you have enough reserve, but we just don't know how long this is going to go and how much this is going to affect us financially. The whole trickle down effect as small business owners in our churches and hourly folks and, you know, et cetera. You all are on the front lines experiencing that. So that's one side of things. But certainly we have churches with hundreds of thousands of dollars in reserve, you know, just a hearty reserve. I hope that's you. And I would say there certainly is a time to pause and ask an ethical, moral question here. And so, as we know, there is not going to be enough money for everybody. And how do we feel getting money just because we're a little scared, but we have a ton of money in the bank, when we know that there's going to be people who really need it that didn't get this because we got it? And so it's you know, I'm not saying black or white here, but you should pause if you do have healthy reserves and are wondering this question.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I've had this same discussion with my own church, and because I personally didn't feel like they needed to apply, but they insisted that they do apply. And then they to appease me, they said, well, we'll just give it to a church we know is in need. Well, if they follow through with that action, I guess that would be okay. But you know, it's just, you know, it's not anything that somebody can, like me or like Greg, can tell you this is what you need to do. It needs to be a heart decision in how you go about it.
Rollie, there's two questions on here that have unique staff issues here. So Grant has got one. What about a paid nursery worker who isn't working since the stay-at-home order? As far as, is that, Grant, is that counting as an FTE? Is that your question, or?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I think the answer is just, we're just comparing the two time frames. So it's not whether or not somebody's at home and that kind of thing, but February 15th to June 30th of 19 is going to be compared to the same time frame this year. And we have to prove that the FTEs are the same or more. So it's not the aggregate amount of monies in those FTEs, it's just simply FTEs. Okay.
Yeah,
and so
the other thing, I think to add to that, I mean, if that's, you have a paid nursery worker, I mean, and I don't know if they're getting paid, 1099 or not. Are they getting paid 1099?
Yeah, then they don't count.
Then they don't count.
Yeah.
On that one.
So that would be a contractor. Yeah. And then you see Bill's there. He says, we have an employee that retired in December and we haven't replaced that position yet. So that will hurt us in calculations as far as the FTEs. Should we still apply?
Yes, that would be taken into effect as a change in how you do that. So I mean, it just takes, it would be a percentage. So I mean, if you if you think that in the end, having 5% of it not forgiven and just pay that part, and depending on how much you got overall, if that's worth it, then it might be worth going forward with it. So it's just you know that right off the bat that you won't get that percentage forgiven.
Rollie, what would you do if you went to your bank tomorrow and they told you they don't have the applications yet from the SBA? What would you do?
Well, if they don't have them by then or know what they're going to do, I would be concerned, and I might want to look at the Evangelical Christian Credit Union and get on their list. But if it looks like, if they say they don't have them now, but they're gearing up to have it all rolled out on Monday and they're putting you on a waiting list, then I would say that's okay. But if you sense that they're just going, I need to contact the SBA and see if I can be an authorized lender, I think it's too late if they're just deciding to do that at that point. Does that answer?
So Bill asks a question about, it's a polity question, and I'll take a stab at this. So Bill, unfortunately, I have not done the research as far as Oregon nonprofit law. So I have been hearing from other states that under their nonprofit law, there are some provisions for emergency situations where the boards basically can make decisions. So I would go to the nonprofit section of Oregon there and just try to search that. I will say this as far as why we are deciding to do our annual meeting this year online, is that Washington does allow churches to hold online meetings. And so a lot of the churches up here north of the border are doing that to try to get these approvals. So everybody, you need to hear that. You got to remember, we're congregational in our polity. So Bill is asking a good question, because in normal situations, we have to get the approval of our membership in order to incur debt. Incurring debt is one of those congregational rights to chime in on. And so we'll need to find out if there's some kind of emergency act clause in both of these states. But certainly, if you can do online meetings, that might be an easy way to get around it.
Yeah, if you just search that emergency provision, that's we've had some of our conferences that have already put out documentation on that, and just check it out. I mean, it's important to not try and do it without the proper vote, and that's why I said earlier, consider it a loan, not a grant, when you're going through it.
Yeah.
And get the right designation.
And if anybody finds that, please send it to Dawn and or me, and we'll do our work in the next 24 hours to try to get that information as well.
Yep. And then to answer this question, is it accurate that employees whose payroll is over 100K aren't eligible? And it's the cash portion of their compensation. You can only, when you're doing the average amount for over the 12 months, you can only include 100,000, period. That's what you're capped at on that salary portion. But I heard a determination, and this is where you might, that it's the salary portion, that 100,000 you can only go up to, but the benefits and pension and stuff that's above that can be still included.
Yeah.
So have most of that information available.
I'm 99% sure that we don't have a single pastor in the conference that above their housing allowance, they're making over 100. So I know our pastors are well compensated in certain places, but with the housing allowance crossed out, I think we're okay.
But great questions. I mean, it's This is not an easy subject when it's a moving subject. I mean, it'd be fun if I could have just paid it, had all the facts on Saturday, digested them and given them to you, but they keep changing as they interpret stuff. So.
Yeah, I got that question, Grant. Yeah, I would just do it now. I mean, it doesn't stop you from beginning the process. It's actually signing the loan. And so, work on getting your approvals now, and I'm sure it'll sync up as far as a 2-week notice.
Yeah, just send out your notice, right away. And you can always cancel the meeting if you decide not to do it. So,
yeah. Okay, any more questions about the PPP and the CARE Act? Okay.
Well, I'm glad you guys are seeking out these answers. Just remember that Church COVID-19, if you have some insomnia tonight, it's a great website to go to and search it out. They have lots of information. If you can't seem to find what you're doing there, if you want to just email me or you can text me, I would be more than happy to dive into it. I know I'm 2 hours later than all of you, but this is important. So I won't respond after certain points of time, but if you look at that site, it's very helpful. All right.
Okay, great. Should we go on? We're going to shift to financial leadership during times of crisis. Oh, there it goes. I had it. I knew I had it there. I forgot to get that last bullet. Sorry, Rollie.
Yeah, well, there it is. It is out there. Yeah, that last important bullet. Oh, and then, yeah, there we go. All right.
Okay, sorry.
So this is a part I have more fun in this section because it's kind of stays, it's an important piece. But I just want to make sure that when you're going through managing in a time of crisis, I'm sure you all have learned, where your income is coming from, right now. You need to, know what your fixed expenses are right now, and you need to know your reserves. Those are extremely important. And we're just going to touch base and dive into it a little bit more. Let's hit the next slide. When you're knowing your income, I mean, I hope you all are steering your people towards the online giving, even your reluctant folks, because this is money that comes in and you can start using it right away. There is, if you haven't ever set up online giving in your church, check with your conference right away. The ECC has an online giving platform that can be set up with you in one day and get you going on that one. I did find out from a little bird on the wall that National Covenant Properties helps support that behind the scenes to reduce your fees, because we feel it's important for you to have that as a platform. You're still going to have people who want to do the cash and check giving. Just set up a process. Now with everybody's that stay at home, you probably can't, count the check giving every day, but just make sure you have somebody doing the mail and get that processed, at least once a week. Now, where your income sources suffer a lot during this is if you have a preschool and leases, and I can feel and share your pain on that one. It's not an easy thing when your main income source is all of a sudden gone away, and your heart understands why it's gone away, and you just have to make that up in another way. That's why, this program of the CARES Act is so important, because that can help fill that in. If that's a preschool that comes from, that's supported by your church, you can get income to pay for those teachers and cover that. If it's a preschool that's leasing to you, then they've got a chance to go out and get their own source of income and then make you whole by paying the lease payments. So, you know, just having a preschool renting it from you and not responding in any way and taking advantage of some things that they can take advantage of is not good stewardship on their part. I'll get off that soapbox and let's move on to the next slide. Know your fixed expenses. You know, this is where you're going to be buckling down and saving your, you know, really cutting your costs so that even if you don't get 100% of your income in, you can help reduce some of the costs in those areas. Most of the time, you've reached out and you've started to cut the staff and payroll, you know, the payroll part, because that's a big part of your expenses. But with this CARES Act, you can take care of that. But you can cut some of your facility costs, you know, by being very efficient with your buildings that are not being used and making sure you're not wasting utilities in those buildings. Limiting, you know, extra maintenance during that time. If you're short on some cash, it's probably not the time to take on a big project in one of those buildings. But if you're flush with cash and you've got a capital reserve, now's the time to get some of that work done. So the other part of budgets that I think during crisis it ends up getting restricted or held back, but I think this is a part of your fixed expenses that you need to just make sure you're funding these areas, because these mission needs are going to need the money even more in a time of crisis. So if you can keep that up, that's a good thing. Ministry expenses. Now, you know, so that's not the salary stuff, but that's the doing ministry. Those expenses are really changing during this time. You're going to be doing a lot of things online, so that's the kind of, you're going to have to pay for that online platform, but you might not have to pay for, you know, buying pizzas every week for whatever group you have coming in or other events. You can save some money in. And you're also saving some of your utility costs because of lack of use of your building. So just take a look at those expenses and watch them closely. I think I got one more slide. Let's see. Let's hit the next one. And then knowing your reserves. I talked about this briefly in the CARES, is you have that operational reserve specific, you know, it's either specific or your unrestricted funds at this point in time for operations. Know what that is, because that's what you're going to tap during this crisis time first. So if you have, you know, that full 3 months, or if you're blessed and have 6 months, you're going to be okay during this crisis, at least so far. I mean, if it goes on for 12 months, we're all going to be in trouble. Mortgage reserve. Some of you who've recently taken out loans with NCP know that that's a requirement of ours to have a mortgage reserve. So that's a good thing to tap during a time of crisis, that you can use that for helping to make mortgage payments, to allow more money in your operational reserve to take care of that. The capital reserve is your building repair and improvement. I would recommend, you know, not necessarily doing a big repair during this unless you have the other two buckets filled rather well, because if there may be a need to have to reallocate some of that if you don't have as much in reserves, you know, at a later date. So hit the next slide. And these are the next steps, is what I think it's important to do. Those of you who were part of my call earlier, you should have gotten a sample month of cash flow to you to calculate. I think it's important for you to really cash flow out what your expenses and your income is going to be over these next months, how you supplement that income from your reserves, and see how you can manage cash through this crisis. And keeping in communication with your congregation, as I'm sure you've all learned that through the online platforms and everything that's out there, even though you try to over communicate to the congregation, you never will. And they just need to understand where you are, what programs you're doing, what, you know, how everybody's getting along, but they also need to know, hey, we still need you to write that check or go to our online portal and continue to support ministry. The other big step I want you to be doing is centralized expense control. You know, even if you have multiple people that oversee it in the current process, just narrow it down to really a small, you know, 1 or 2 people that are helping control and just making sure you're spending, you know, the necessary money and you're reallocating funds accordingly to help make this a positive experience going through. So, Brian, do you have anything that you want to add to any of that?
Brian, if you could,
You're muted.
as you're
No,
unmuting
so I
yourself,
was
if
hitting
you
my
could,
I was hitting my space bar. I wasn't sure what was going on. One of the things that we've done at the conference, we've done in our church, and we're helping camp, is just to try to do some scenario planning. So maybe just to go a little bit further with what Rollie's talking about, we're running a scenario that you kind of have a realistic scenario, and then maybe one that's a little bit longer in term, might be a little bit more challenging. So try to figure out what impact you think it might be to your income, estimate where you think your expenses are, and run something where you have a significant notable reduction through July, and then maybe have that ramp back up slowly over the remainder part of the year. But run a scenario just in case that might run through September, October. We've done that. We've kind of done that in a couple of situations to try to figure out, I kind of call it the hibernation mode. If you just had to put everything in hibernation for a while and reboot later, you know, what would that look like? We're here at the conference to help. If there's anything that you run into, any resources you need, or we're trying to be at the ready. We're not sure what everybody's going to experience because we really don't know how this thing's going to play out. But if there is a need, contact Greg, give me a call, contact Dawn or Rollie. And if you need any help with modeling, I'm happy to help in any way I can.
It seems really appropriate, you know, in that communications piece to your congregation, to as part of that is to remind them what a large percentage of your budget is salary, and what a large percentage is building. And, you know, maybe people will be under the impression, oh, not as much is happening at the church right now. And, you know, but I think it's an education piece to remind people too, that a large part of our budgets tend to be salary and building if you have one. And those aren't, we don't want to see those change, you know, those aren't going away, or we hope they won't go away.
so Brian has helped us run through scenarios of a 30% reduction and a 50% reduction. And, you know, other percentages might make more sense for your setting. But, you know, just using that in relation to what Rollie shared with us, it's, you know, just run those scenarios to say, okay, if this reduction happened, how much of our savings would we need to spend and how long could we do that, you know, that kind of thing. So just real important exercises to do regardless of where it may be right now. I mean, things are so fluid, right?
Yeah, and then those of you who have loans with NCP, I'm sure you've seen stuff where banks are doing, you know, forbearance over periods of time. You know, we're not technically eligible to do that because our sources of funds are different. Our sources of funds are covenant people across the country. What we can do though for you is if you work that cash flow out and you realize it's going to be really, really tight, and you could use some relief on your mortgage for a period of time, just get in touch with me. Show me your cash flow. Show me what you were thinking. We can work out something to do a modification on your payments over a period. We just want to make sure that we're not a hindrance to ministry. We want to help you as much as possible, and work through it. But if you look and your cash flows are that way, you know, I would hope that you're reaching out through that CARES Act program, of the payment protection program, because you know, if it's that tight, you really need to make sure that gets taken care of. but we're there to help with you. We want to work with you and be, you know, we just can't help everybody the same way, but there's my contact information. And if you didn't like how I treated you, you can always talk to my boss, Peter. But you know, I love hearing from all of you, and Peter gets jealous of where I travel. So I do want to get my wings back so I can come out and see every one of you again. And I'll throw this guarantee out there, Greg, that your next annual meeting that's live, I will be there no matter what. So,
Amen.
You got
Looking
first
forward to it.
priority.
There we go.
Rollie, do you have a sense of what might happen? I know NCP is a little bit different. Do you have a sense of what might happen to the on-demand interest rates as well as the loan interest rates going forward?
Gosh, I don't. I have what I want them to be, and what I want to have happen. I mean, right now our mortgage rates are at 4.5, and our lowest interest rate right now is at 1.5 on our demand account. What you're going to see, what I can say is, if we drop our mortgage rate, you're going to see that demand rate drop by that same amount. So they are going to stay in unison. And so I mean, it's changing every day. I mean, this crazy stock market, I mean, it makes no sense to me. But I would not be surprised if we have a reduction in our loan rate, but I do not know what that would be.
I'll help you with that offline, Rollie. That's all I do.
Yeah, you have always been so gracious to help me out in that calculation. And I do know on a denomination level, you know, they are working on something. So we're all trying to figure out what is the best avenue to provide help where help is needed. So for information, you can always contact me.
So folks, two good places in addition to all the other places that I'm sure you're dialing into is the Covenant website that has their own COVID-19 resource link, and there will be all kinds of stuff on there, including technology stuff, as well as information that we've been sharing. But under our webpage, if you go under resources, you'll see CARE Act right there, and that's where we're dropping all of this stuff into. So you'll get the recording. This is Tuesday's recording right here, right now, but Rollie's PowerPoint, and then he referenced the 3 different templates that could be useful to you. So that's all live right now. We'll put this evening's video on there as well, okay? Any last questions?
Yeah, I saw a question that came in from Grant. He just asked, when is our next interest loan rate change? Our board takes those under consideration at our board meetings on every even month, which is April 9th is our next meeting. And right now, if we do lower our rates, it doesn't technically apply to everybody. It'll apply when our loans interest adjusts every 3 years. So depending on when your cycle is going to be, you know, if they surprised us all and they said all of our loan interest rates were going to be X, I'll be the first one to give you all a call and let you know what's going to happen. But if you're curious on what our loan rates are going to be, if you call me on April 10th, I will tell you.
Really grateful for you to be with us, Rollie, twice this week. It's been invaluable. It's really helped so many of our churches and leaders. And Brian, thank you for just your faithful service over these years and just being with us as well. Shout out to my colleague Don and helping manage the chat and everything else, and setting all this up. But thank you all again. We know that you are on the front lines and are just carrying a lot. You know, we keep on saying that as leaders, we carry the emotional weight of the institution. We carry the emotional weight of what our churches are going through. And so that's a lot. So what Don and I have been saying, and every opportunity that we have with pastors and leaders, is Make sure that you manage your rhythms and you take care of yourself. Read a lot of Psalms, stay connected to your family, and stay close to home. So God bless you all. We are praying for you. Do not hesitate to call any one of us, Brian, Rollie, Don, or me. We are here to serve you, okay?
Absolutely.
God bless you all, and we will talk to you soon. Take care. Thanks for being on tonight.
All right. Take care.